Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum dear students. Today's video is the first one from a series of videos on different ages of English literature. Today's video is related to Anglo-Saxon literature. We are going to discuss heroic poetry, elegies, Christian poetry and prose that was produced in Anglo-Saxon age. Students, here you can notice a list of different contents that you have to cover in this course. Number one is the medieval age, and today's lesson is about the first part of the medieval age, that is Old English period or Anglo-Saxon age of English literature. The time period of this age is 450 AD, and the original inhabitants of that area were Celts or Britons. Then three tribes invaded England. They were Angles, Saxons, and Jutes. They started attacking different parts of England at that time, and so there was no centralized government after the departure of Romans, and that was just a loose colony of different tribes. If we talk about Anglo-Saxon people, they were pagans, means they were non-Christian people, but started getting converted to Christianity when Saint Augustine got a church and a monastery constructed at Canterbury in 597. They were uncivilized people, uneducated people, they were warriors, they kept on fighting. There were numerous fights among different tribes. They were seafarers, and no formal education was there, and because they kept on fighting, that is why they hardly had time to engage themselves in literary pursuits. Anglo-Saxon literature included heroic poetry, elegies, Christian poetry, and prose. We are going to talk about it later on. The content or subject matter of literature was related to sea, battles, warriors, and adventures. Students, if we talk about the recurrent themes in Anglo-Saxon literature or the characteristics of Anglo-Saxon literature, they include responsiveness to nature, belief in fate, reverence for womankind, emphasis on solemn courtesy, generosity, fidelity, and sheer endurance. Means the epic heroes or the heroes in different pieces of writing, they were supposed to be courteous, generous, loyal, and they were supposed to have strong endurance. Besides that, there was the sense of shortness of life and the passing away of all the things except the fame a man leaves behind. Then they also focused upon loyalty, reputation, hospitality, envy, and revenge. And there was another theme of strong religious convictions. All these themes are found in Anglo-Saxon literature. Now, if we talk about heroic poetry, this was the poetry that brings us most closely into contact with the origins of the invaders, and this was written in a language that is known as Old English or Anglo-Saxon language, and we can say that it was basically the English language in the earliest stages of its development. Anglo-Saxon poetry was alliterative, it was without rhyme, and there were four stressed syllables in each line and different number of unstressed syllables. There was another important feature that there was a definite pause between the two halves of each line, and this pause was called caesura, with two stresses in each half. If we look at this language superficially, it looks very far removed from modern English, quite different from modern English, but a literal translation helps a lot to understand this language. Students, only some 30,000 lines of Anglo-Saxon poetry are extant, and this is older non-religious poetry, and it is definitely the product of pagan heroic society. And Beowulf and other remains of early English poetry are closer to their pagan origins in as far as their mood and purpose is concerned. Let's talk about epic poetry. Epic is a long narrative poem. Speaker is the narrator of the story, And theme or subject of an epic is grand. It's very important. Setting of an epic is huge. It may be a sea, a region, or the whole universe. Main character must be capable of being a hero. It means he must possess lofty human qualities, and this hero has a purpose for which he embarks on a journey. And the action of the epic is based on superhuman deeds. The hero is seen struggling against natural or supernatural forces, which test his wit, bravery, and his battle skills. Besides that, gods or other supernatural beings take a part or take interest in the action of the epic. And purpose of the epic is not only to entertain the readers or the listeners, but also to teach and inspire. So all these are the characteristics of an epic. Here are some points about epic narration. First of all, there is an invocation that is part of the epic. The poet narrator starts the poem by stating the tale's subject and asking for poetic inspiration from a guiding spirit. Usually, this guiding spirit is the goddess of poetry, Muse, and epic writers take inspiration from, they invoke the help of that goddess of poetry to to assist them, to help them in the task of writing an epic. The narrator starts telling the tale in the middle of things, means some very important events have already occurred, and we come to know about those events from the speeches of principal characters, which include gods and antagonists of the epic hero. And these speeches reveal their personalities. The tone and style of the narrative in an epic are formal. They are not at all conversational or colloquial or informal. So, the style of the epic is grand, it's very serious. The use of figurative language is important feature of an epic, which makes the narrative vivid and exciting for listeners or the readers. Students, Beowulf is an anonymous Old English poem. It's a famous epic. It is related to a hero from Geatland, that is in modern Sweden, who travels to Denmark, where he kills man eating monsters. And in later life, back home in Sweden, he confronts and kills a fire breathing dragon, but then he himself dies in the effort. Beowulf holds a special position in Anglo-Saxon literature because it's the only complete extant epic of its kind in an ancient Germanic language. It's a poem technically impressive in its handling of narrative verse, remarkably successful in rendering the combination of heroic idealism and somber fatalism, describing the ideals of those people belonging to heroic age, and also about their beliefs in their strong belief in fate. जिस तरह के लोग इस पोएम में डिस्क्राइब किए गए हैं, दे कैन बी कॉल्ड अ मैन ऑफ फ्यू वर्ड्स. इट मीन्स दे वर द मैन ऑफ एक्शन, दो दे स्पोक लेस. दे वर ब्रेव एंड लॉयल एज वेल एज क्रूअल एंड इम्प्लैकेबल. उनके लिए लाइफ एक सोम्बर बिजनेस थी, और उनकी लाइफ में कुछ कोई गेटी या कोई फ़न नहीं था. अगर सीनिक बैकग्राउंड देखें इस पोएम का, तो वो भी ब्लीक और कोल्ड है, और जिस उन लोगों के मिजाज को सूट करता हुआ. नेचर दिखाई गई है हमेशा अपने ब्लैकेस्ट और फियर्सेस्ट मूड में, और देयर इज़ नो सेंटिमेंट, नो टेंडरनेस टू रिलीव द ग्लूम ऑफ द एटमॉस्फेयर. अगर बात की जाए ओवरऑल इसके इम्पैक्ट की, तो हम ये कह सकते हैं कि बेओवुल्फ स्टैंड्स बिफोर अस एज द अर्ली इंग्लिश आइडियल ऑफ विराइल करेज एंड नोबिलिटी. यानी लोगों के अंदर जो एक स्टैंडर्ड ऑफ करेज और नोबिलिटी वो लोग देखना चाहते थे, दैट इज़ प्रेजेंटेड इन दिस पोएम. Students, Beowulf carries us successfully into Anglo-Saxon heroic imagination, with its emphasis on solemn values of courtesy, generosity, fidelity, and sheer endurance. हमें पता चलता है कि किस तरीके से वो लोग शाइस्तगी को, जनरोसिटी को, लॉयल्टी को और डिटर्मिनेशन को पसंद किया करते थे, इन वैल्यूज़ को एम्फसाइज करते थे, और उनके अंदर एक सेंस ऑफ शॉर्टनेस ऑफ लाइफ था, और ये कि सब चीज़ों ने गुजर जाना है, ख़त्म हो जाना है, सिवाय उस फेम के जो इंसान अपने पीछे इस दुनिया में छोड़ जाता है. सो दे गेव सो मच इम्पोर्टेंस टू लॉयल्टी, रेपुटेशन, जनरोसिटी, हॉस्पिटैलिटी, But besides that, envy and revenge also, all these are the main themes of this poem. Now let's discuss about Anglo-Saxon religious poetry. Students, you know the people of England got converted to Christianity after the arrival of Saint Augustine to that part, and their Christianizing had more far-reaching effects on their literature than the addition of Christian elements to heroic poems. 8th सेंचुरी तक आते आते एंग्लो सैक्सन हेरोइक पोइट्री की टेक्निक्स को प्योरली क्रिश्चियन थीम्स पर अप्लाई किया गया, और जिसका नतीजा ये निकला कि हमारे पास एक सब्सटेंशियल बॉडी ऑफ एंग्लो सैक्सन रिलीजियस पोइट्री मौजूद है. अगर हम उस दौर के क्रिश्चियन लिटरेचर को देखें तो हमें पता चलता है कि दोज पीपल वर इन टच विद न्यू यूरोपियन सिविलाइजेशन एज वेल एज विद एंशंट क्लासिकल वर्ल्ड. Religious poetry seems to have flourished in northern England throughout the 8th century, though most of it has survived only in West Saxon transcriptions of the late 10th century. बीट जो कि ग्रेट इंग्लिश एक्लीसियास्टिकल हिस्टोरियन और स्कॉलर था, उसने अपनी बुक एक्लीसियास्टिकल हिस्ट्री ऑफ द इंग्लिश पीपल में कैडमन के बारे में हमें बताया, who suddenly and miraculously received the gift of the song and at once began to sing in praise of God, the Creator, verses which he had never heard before. So, Cadman was one of the famous poets of that era who wrote religious verses. अगर कैडमन की पोइम्स की बात की जाए तो दे वर बेस्ड ऑन ओल्ड टेस्टामेंट स्टोरी. First one was Genesis. It was the longest one and it contained almost 3,000 lines. Then he wrote Exodus. This was the oldest of the Anglo-Saxon biblical poems. Then the third one was Daniel. It was the less interesting and it had low dramatic quality and it was also prosaic or dull in tone. Another famous religious poet of Anglo-Saxon era was Cynewulf. His famous poems included Christ, Juliana, Ellen, the fates of the apostles, etc. All these poems demonstrate a high degree of literary craftsmanship, and there was also a note of mystical contemplation, which sometimes rises to a high level of religious passion. अगर हम कैडमन की पोइम्स देखें तो वो हमें जस्ट बिब्लिकल पैराफ्रेज लगती हैं, यानी बाइबल की स्टोरीज़ को वर्स की फॉर्म दी कैडमन ने, लेकिन सिनावुल्फ की पोइम्स के अंदर हमें एक डायडेक्टिक और एक डिवोशनल और मिस्टिकल एलिमेंट दिखाई देता है जो कि कैडमन की पोइम से डिफरेंट था. Now, though these poems express a personal devotional feeling, none of them can be said to be really lyrical in character. अगर कैडमन की बात की जाए, सिनावुल्फ की बात की जाए या किसी भी और पोएम की बात की जाए तो एंग्लो सेक्सन ईरा में लिखी गई जो पोएम्स हैं वो लिरिकल नहीं थी. नाइदर द हेरोइक नॉर द रिलीजियस पोइट्री ऑफ द एंग्लो सेक्सन टेंड्स टुवर्ड्स द लिरिक, दो वी notice a note of somber elegy that is sometimes struck and it is really developed for its own sake. वो खुद ब खुद ही आ जाता था, deliberate attempt नहीं थी. Besides heroic poems and religious poems, elegies were also written in that era. Now, what is elegy? Origin of this word may be traced back to the Greek word allegos, which means a song of mourning. So, elegy commonly refers to a song or poem lamenting one who is dead. किसी की मौत पर अफसोस करते हुए लिखी जाने वाली पोएम को एलेजी कहते हैं. And figuratively, this word also refers to a nostalgic poem, जिसमें पोइट माजी को याद करता है और एक ग्लूम और ग्रीफ को डिस्क्राइब किया जाता है. Widsith and Dior, they are also the famous poems written in Anglo-Saxon age. Dior is an elegy. Widsith is the earliest of the Old English poems in which Widsith, who was a wanderer, tells of his wanderings. He speaks of the feudal halls in which he sang and how men loved his songs and gave him gifts, so that wherever he went he found a ready welcome. He praises his art at the end of the poem inasmuch as it had brought him joy. So this poem presents a glee man, a happy man. On the other hand, there was another early poem entitled as The Complaint of Dior. This was an elegy and it gives the reverse side of the glee man or the happy man painted by the poem Widsith. Now, prose was also produced in Anglo-Saxon age. Let's discuss. The poetry of that time was used as an emotional stimulant. The prose was mostly educational. It means prose का purpose educational था और Christianity created the monk scholar who did much to shape the literature of that time. The first Englishman who became famous as a scholar and teacher was Aldam. He is one significant name in the history of Wessex. He died in 709 after many achievements both in prose and verse. This person did much of his work in Latin as it was the custom of the time. However, his English was esteemed highly by King Alfred. Besides being a scholar, he was also interested in architecture and music, and his skill as a musician was superb. He touched the hearts of many with the help of these remarkable talents. Now, students, what Eldham did for the south was done by Bede for the north. Bede owed much to the abbot of the monastery, Benedict, a keen and brilliant man. Bede was a fine classical scholar and teacher, and his writings abound in classical poets' quotations. He studied eagerly every department of human thought, uh, the philosophies, arts, sciences, and he wrote a book, Ecclesiastical History of English People, that told us much about the English England of his time. He epitomizes his life in these words: I wholly applied myself to the study of the scripture, and amidst the observance of regular discipline and the daily care of singing in the church, I always took delight in learning, teaching, and writing. So, students, these two men played an important role in the prose of Anglo-Saxon age. King Alfred is a very important name when it comes to the prose produced in Anglo-Saxon age. Danes invaded England in the 10th century, and their invasions were literally catastrophic to the progress of English literature. They were attracted by the wealth of the greatest monasteries in England, and so they came, they plundered, and destroyed the finest. They destroyed the splendid libraries until there was not one house of learning left. At that time, happily, a man arose who rescued England from her sorry plight, and he was King Alfred. His early years as king were spent in fighting hard against the Danes, and he proved he was a great warrior as well as a keen social worker. He could fight like his heroes as well as sing about them. He got successful in winning peace for his people, and having won peace, he sought to nurture their mental life. No English king ever did more for his people than King Alfred. He had a genius for kingship and he never abused that talent. Alfred's greatness was the greatness of personality rather than of art. He was not a great poet or a great prose man in the way that he was a great fighter and organizer. So, after 15 years of incessant warfare, he made peace with the foe and looked around to repair what they destroyed. So, he made a great contribution to the progress of literature at that time. Students, these 5 points sum up the efforts of King Alfred regarding the repair of destruction caused by Danes. He was the pioneer of popular education. He founded a monastery at Athenley. He saw to the education of his noblemen. He saw to the careful education of the churchmen, and he was also mindful of the common masses. Alfred's services regarding education. He worked for the abundance of English literature. He superintended the translation of many Latin books. He himself prepared a handbook for the clergyman. He saw to the translation of Bede's famous history of ecclesiastical history of English people. He himself adapted the philosophy of Boethius, and he took the meditations of Boethius as standard textbook of moral and religious thought. He himself had the rare merit of clarity and delightful charm in his writing. He was the first English man of letters who was not a churchman. He wanted to make English loved and known by the people at large. I hope students today's video was informative. Please like it and share and subscribe the channel as well. Wish you all the best. Allah Hafiz.